The man nobody counted on. Before he was a legend, William Arthur Shomo was an undertaker. He had attended the Cincinnati College of Embalming and the Pittsburgh School of Embalming between 1937 and 1940, learning the quiet, methodical art of preparing the dead. He was precise, patient, comfortable working alone with things other people found unsettling. In many ways, those qualities would matter enormously, just not in any mortuary. When the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor in December 1941 and the United States was suddenly at war, Shomo had already been in the aviation cadet program for 4 months. He wanted to fly fighters. He wanted aerial combat. He had trained for it, dreamed about it, and pushed himself toward it with the same methodical patience he had brought to his previous profession. What he got instead was reconnaissance. He was assigned to the 82nd Tactical Reconnaissance Squadron, a unit that photographed things, not fought them. Their job was to fly low over enemy territory, point cameras out of the fuselage, and bring back intelligence. Valuable work, essential work, but not the work of aces.
Other men got the P-38 Lightnings. Other men got the P-47 Thunderbolts. Pilots like Richard Bong, Tommy Maguire, and Gerald Johnson, names that would appear in newspapers across America, flew the long-range escorts and interceptors that put them in the sky where Japanese fighters operated. Their photographs showed enemy aircraft exploding. Shomo's photographs showed empty beaches and abandoned supply dumps. The aircraft the 82nd flew in the early years made the frustration even worse. The Bell P-39 Airacobra was a deeply unusual machine. Its engine was mounted behind the cockpit rather than in the nose, driving the propeller through a 10-foot shaft that ran between the pilot's legs. This gave the nose room for a fearsome-looking 37mm cannon, but the P-39 lacked a turbo supercharger, which meant it struggled badly above 12,000 feet. More critically for operations across the vast Pacific, its range was barely 500 miles total, around 250 out and 250 back with minimal fuel reserve. The Japanese operated their major air bases at Rabaul, Truk, and Wewak, all well beyond that radius. The P-39 could fly over the jungle and take photographs. It could not reach the sky where the real war was happening. Month after month through 1943 and into 1944, Shomo flew his missions along the New Guinea coast, airstrip to airstrip, photographing beaches, counting supply dumps, strafing trucks and barges when they could be found. The squadron also flew the P-40 Warhawk, a somewhat better aircraft with similar range problems, better for ground attack, still inadequate for reaching areas where Japanese fighters concentrated. Every mission that ended without an aerial engagement was another chapter in a long story about waiting. He was not bitter about it. The records and accounts that exist about Shomo describe a man who was professional and thorough, who understood his mission, performed it without complaint, and quietly prepared himself for an opportunity that might never come. He studied gun camera footage from pilots who had scored kills. He practiced gunnery. He analyzed tactics. In the skies over New Guinea, there was plenty of time to think. What he was building, without entirely knowing it, was a reservoir of theory and technical understanding that had never been tested in actual combat. He had 202 missions and 0 aerial victories to show for it by the time 1944 drew to a close. Then, in December of 1944, everything changed. The North American P-51 Mustang is widely regarded as one of the finest piston-engined fighter aircraft ever built, and the version that arrived at the 82nd Tactical Reconnaissance Squadron in December 1944 represented the very best of what the design could offer. The F-6B was a reconnaissance conversion of the P-51D, the most refined and numerous Mustang variant produced. A pair of K-24 cameras were installed in the fuselage, shooting obliquely through windows cut into the aluminum skin. But, critically, the 6 wing-mounted .5 caliber Browning machine guns were retained in full. This was an armed reconnaissance aircraft, not a converted bomber stripped of its fighting ability, a proper fighter with cameras bolted in. The performance gap between what Shomo had been flying and what he now sat inside was staggering. Where the P-39 managed around 376 miles per hour on a good day at 15,000 feet, the P-51D hit 437 miles per hour and could sustain it at altitude. Where the P-39's range capped out at 500 miles total, the F-6D with internal fuel alone could reach over 900 miles, and with the drop tanks that became standard practice, the range extended beyond 1,400 miles. Suddenly, the airfields at Tuguegarao, Apari, and Lawag in northern Luzon were not distant impossibilities. They were within reach, reconnoitered, and photographed on routine missions. Shomo took command of the 82nd Squadron on December 24, 1944. He was 26 years old. He moved the unit to Muro Airstrip in the Philippines on January 1, 1945, positioning it to support General Douglas MacArthur's ambitious push northward. The Lingayen Gulf landings on January 9, 1945, brought American forces ashore on Luzon itself, the largest and most strategically vital island in the Philippine archipelago. Nearly 175,000 American troops came ashore along a 25-mile beachhead. MacArthur's drive toward Manila was underway. The 82nd's job was to give those ground commanders eyes, photographs of Japanese troop concentrations, gun positions, and air bases that might still harbor enemy aircraft capable of striking the beachhead or Allied shipping. On January 9th, Shomo flew his first combat mission in the new Mustang. It was also only his 6th flight in the aircraft type. He was still learning the machine's handling, its responsive controls, its wide bubble canopy offering panoramic visibility, the way it climbed and turned differently from everything he had flown before. The mission took him north toward the Japanese airfield at Tuguegarao. As they approached the field at low altitude, Shomo spotted an aircraft moving, a Japanese Achi D-3A Val dive bomber, the kind that had attacked Pearl Harbor, now in its landing pattern, descending toward the runway. He had waited 2 years and 202 missions for this moment. He did not hesitate. He closed on the Val from behind and opened fire at close range. The Japanese pilot was focused on landing. He never saw the Mustang. One burst from those 6.50 caliber guns, and the Val caught fire, crashing short of the runway in a cascade of flame and twisted metal. One aerial victory. After 2 years, after 202 missions over empty beaches and jungle trails. One Val bomber shot down while it was landing. Not exactly a dogfight, but an aerial kill nonetheless. That night, Shomo could not sleep. He lay awake thinking about the next mission, wondering if the opportunity would come again. The Japanese still had substantial air strength in northern Luzon, an estimated 300 fighters operating from those same northern airfields. The reconnaissance missions were necessary and important, but now Shomo knew that the aircraft he was flying could fight back. Whatever came tomorrow, he was ready. January 11th, the setup. The morning with January 11th, 1945 began at 7:32 when Shomo climbed into the cockpit of his F-6D Mustang, a plane he had named Snooks 5, carrying the nickname across 5 different aircraft throughout his career, a reference to his civilian background that he wore without embarrassment. His wingman that morning was Lieutenant Paul Lipscomb, 23 years old, relatively new to the squadron, flying his first mission where aerial combat was a genuine possibility rather than a remote theoretical concern. Their assigned mission was identical to what Shomo had flown 2 days earlier, a low-level photo reconnaissance run over the Japanese airfields at Tuguegarao, Apari, and Lawag in northern Luzon. 3 airfields, 3 sets of photographs, 1 assessment of Japanese air strength to bring back for the intelligence officers. They would fly at 500 feet, below radar coverage, hugging the terrain. Standard procedure. The broader strategic situation gave context to why this mattered so urgently. The Lingayen Gulf landings had put American troops on Luzon just 2 days earlier. Kamikaze aircraft had wrought havoc on Allied shipping during the approach. Between January 4th and 11th alone, dozens of ships were damaged and several sunk by suicide attacks. Any remaining Japanese aircraft operating from northern Luzon represented a direct threat to American soldiers still landing on the beach and the supply convoys keeping them alive. Intelligence about the precise location and strength of those remaining aircraft was not bureaucratic box-ticking. It was life and death information. The Japanese themselves were in the process of a strategic withdrawal. With the American beachhead established and growing, Japanese commanders recognized that Luzon was increasingly untenable as a base. Aircraft and personnel were being pulled back toward Formosa, toward the home islands, toward the final defense that Japanese military planners knew was coming. The northern Luzon airfields were being evacuated rather than reinforced. But evacuation moves aircraft in large, organized formations, exactly the kind of formation that might be visible from a low-flying reconnaissance aircraft in clear weather. The weather on January 11th was exceptional. Clear skies, unlimited visibility, perfect for photography, and equally perfect for spotting things that didn't want to be spotted. At approximately 9 in the morning, flying at 500 feet, Shomo looked up. 2,000 feet above them, flying south, coming directly toward his pair of Mustangs, was a formation of Japanese aircraft. He counted them fast, 12 fighters, all Kawasaki Ki-61 Tonis except one, a single Nakajima Ki-44 Tojo nestled in the formation. And they were escorting something, a twin-engine Mitsubishi G4M Betty bomber, flying in their midst, its olive-drab fuselage unmistakable against the blue sky. 13 Japanese aircraft against 2 American Mustangs. The smart move, the tactically sound, militarily justifiable, completely defensible move, was to stay low, stay invisible, let the formation pass, complete the photo mission, and fly home. Nobody would have questioned that decision. Nobody could have criticized it. 13 against 2 was not a fight, it was a statistic. But Shomo had been waiting since 1941 for this moment. 3 years and 200 missions of watching other men become aces. 3 years of studying tactics he had never been able to apply. 3 years of flying aircraft too short range to find the enemy. He now had an aircraft capable of the mission, and 13 Japanese planes were 2,000 feet above him. He keyed his radio and told Lipscomb they were attacking. Then he pulled the Mustang into a climbing turn. 6 minutes that shook the sky. What happened next lasted approximately 6 minutes. In those 6 minutes, the combination of tactical judgment, technical skill, surprise, and lethal precision that Shomo had been quietly accumulating for 3 years was unleashed all at once. The attack began with an Immelman turn, a classic fighter maneuver in which the pilot climbs, rolls inverted at the top of the climb, and completes the rotation to emerge going in the opposite direction from where he started. Shomo pulled his Mustang up and over, Lipscomb holding tight to his wing, the 2 aircraft gaining altitude as the Japanese formation passed below them heading south. The Japanese pilots were looking ahead, perhaps scanning for threats from Allied airfields ahead of them, not looking down, not expecting 2 aircraft to emerge from underneath, climbing fast toward their 6 o'clock position. When the Mustangs appeared behind the Japanese formation, several Tony pilots actually opened their canopies and waved. One stood up in his cockpit and signaled. The F-6D Mustang was new to the Pacific Theater. Japanese pilots in late 1944 and early 1945 were far more familiar with P-38 Lightnings and P-47 Thunderbolts. The Mustang's distinctive nose profile, with its chin-mounted radiator intake, looked different from either of those familiar adversaries. The Japanese pilots assumed these were friendly aircraft, perhaps Tony fighters coming up to join the escort from a nearby airfield. That assumption cost them seconds. In aerial combat, seconds are everything. Shomo closed to less than 40 yards, point-blank range, practically touching distance by the standards of air combat. His 6.50 caliber Browning machine guns were converged for 300 yards. At 40 yards, every round from every gun was converging on nearly the same point, creating a cone of fire so dense that almost nothing could fly through it intact. He opened fire on the trailing element's lead aircraft. The Tony exploded, not caught fire, not turned away smoking, exploded, broke apart in midair, pieces of wing and fuselage tumbling backward through the formation, striking other aircraft as the debris field expanded. The Japanese pilot never had time to react because his aircraft ceased to exist in the space of perhaps a second and a half. Shomo shifted his aim to the wingman, already tracking toward the next target before the first one had finished falling. Another burst. The second Tony caught fire and fell away, trailing a plume of black smoke. 2 kills. 3 seconds. Only now did the Japanese formation break. Pilots realized they were under attack. Some turned left, some turned right, some dived, some climbed, some froze completely, shock paralyzing the reflexes that training was supposed to make automatic. The tight escort formation that had protected the Betty dissolved instantly into individuals making individual decisions, none of them coordinated, none of them producing a coherent defensive response. Shomo understood immediately that chaos favored him as long as he kept moving. He attacked the second element from the left side, closing fast, firing into another Tony before the pilot could complete his evasive turn. The aircraft exploded and fell, his third kill,
roughly 10 seconds into the engagement. Number 4 came from the opposite side of the disintegrating formation. He moved across, found another Tony still trying to coordinate with the pilot beside it, and fired. A fourth explosion, a fourth aircraft gone. Somewhere in the middle of this, Lipscomb was fighting his own battle. Shomo was too focused, too completely immersed in the mechanics of target acquisition and fire to track his wingman.
Lipscomb would account for himself, as it turned out, but in those first moments, the two Americans were effectively fighting independent engagements within the same three-dimensional swirl of aircraft. The Mitsubishi G4M Betty bomber was trying to run. It had rolled into a dive the moment the attack began, trading altitude for speed, trying to get low where the terrain around northern Luzon might offer some protection. Two Tony fighters had stayed with it, disciplined escorts, loyal to their primary mission even while their formation was being annihilated around them. Shomo went after the bomber next. The Betty was a formidable-looking aircraft, a large twin-engine machine with defensive guns in the nose, in the dorsal turret, at the waist positions, and a 20mm cannon in the tail. But it had a critical blind spot. The designers, in their effort to maximize range by stripping weight, no armor, no self-sealing fuel tanks, had placed no defensive armament pointing downward. The belly was unprotected. Shomo rolled inverted and pulled through into a split S maneuver, diving below the Betty's flight path, then pulling up underneath it at minimum range.
The Betty's crew couldn't depress their guns far enough to reach him. He fired into the unprotected underside of the fuselage, and the bomber caught fire immediately. The pilot tried to maintain control, tried to line up for a crash landing in a field below, but the fire was spreading fast. 5 kills. The Betty was going down. As Shomo pulled up from the pass, the Nakajima Ki-44 Tojo, the single interceptor in the formation, the fastest aircraft in that Japanese group, locked onto his tail. The Tojo was purpose-built for exactly this role: fast climb rate, high top speed, the ability to get into firing position quickly and stay there. Its pilot had been watching, had seen what Shomo was doing, and had positioned himself correctly. Tracer rounds streaked past the Mustang's bubble canopy. Shomo's response was to go tight. He pulled the Mustang into a vertical spiral, the tightest, most demanding turning maneuver the airframe could sustain. The Mustang was a heavier, faster aircraft than the Tojo, and at low speeds it could sustain a tighter turn radius. The Tojo pilot followed, firing, trying to hold his aim.
But the tight spiral drained the Japanese fighter's airspeed faster than the pilot could compensate. The Tojo's nose began to drop. The fighter stalled, its wings simply unable to generate enough lift to sustain the turn, and fell away into a layer of cloud below, the pilot fighting to recover before he hit the ground. Below him, the Betty hit the earth and erupted. The crash landing the Japanese pilot had been attempting became a fireball. The explosion was close enough that the blast wave physically lurched Shomo's Mustang, and debris from the bomber, pieces of aluminum and fabric, peppered the Mustang's fuselage and wings, leaving small dents and scratches. The two escort Tonys that had stayed with the bomber broke away from the wreckage, running now, not fighting, flying low and fast, trying to disappear into the terrain. Shomo rolled into a dive and went after them. He caught the first at around 300 feet altitude, barely above the treetops, and one short burst was enough. It crashed in flames. Kill number 6. The second Tony was still running, flat out, nearly at ground level.
Shomo pulled more lead, fired, and the aircraft went down burning into the Philippine countryside. Kill number 7. 6 minutes had elapsed from the first shot to the last. The sky was clear except for smoke columns rising from wreckage across roughly 15 miles of northern Luzon terrain. Lipscomb's Mustang was still airborne, and below it, Shomo could see 3 more smoke columns on the ground. Lipscomb had shot down 3 Tonys of his own while Shomo was systematically working through the formation. 10 Japanese aircraft destroyed. 3 had escaped into cloud cover. 2 American Mustangs, both unharmed. Not a single round had struck either American aircraft in a meaningful way. 7 barrel rolls and the reckoning. The flight back to Muro airstrip would take approximately 40 minutes. Shomo had that time to think, to replay what had just happened, to organize it into a coherent narrative that would hold up under debriefing. 7 aerial victories in 1 mission. He had been an ace, the designation given to any pilot with 5 confirmed kills, for somewhere around the 3rd or 4th Japanese aircraft.
He had exceeded the threshold by 2 in 6 minutes on what was effectively his first real combat engagement against alert and armed fighters. He checked his fuel, more than half full. The engagement had been intense but brief, barely touching the F-6D's substantial reserves. He checked his ammunition, He still had rounds remaining. The gun camera mounted in the aircraft had been running throughout the engagement, recording everything. As he crossed the coastline at Lingingen Gulf on the return leg, he began to think about how to explain what he was about to report. In any military bureaucracy, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Saying you shot down 7 aircraft in 6 minutes sounded like the kind of thing shell-shocked pilots said when stress had distorted their perception. He would need the gun camera film. He would need Lipscomb's corroboration. He would need to be precise and credible and completely calm. But before the debriefing, there was a tradition to honor. When a pilot scored an aerial victory, the custom was to mark it with a victory roll over the airfield, a barrel roll for each kill, performed before landing, so that the ground crews waiting below could count the victories from the footage being written in the sky. Shomo had 7 to perform. He came in low over Muro at speed and rolled. Smooth, clean, 1 full rotation. The ground crews looked up. Common enough. Then he climbed and rolled again. Second one. People started paying attention. A third. Ground crews began gathering, pointing upward. A fourth. Unusual. A fifth. The brass started emerging from buildings. A sixth. Officers, senior staff, colonels and generals who had heard the radio report of 10 aircraft destroyed and had come outside to see for themselves. A 7th barrel roll. Perfect and precise. And then Shomo entered the landing pattern. He touched down at 11:09 in the morning, 2 hours and 27 minutes after takeoff. 6 of those minutes had changed everything. The debriefing that followed lasted 3 hours. Shomo described every maneuver, every shot, every kill in sequence, with the precision of a man who had replayed the engagement in his mind a dozen times during the flight south. The intelligence officer recorded everything. The gun camera film was developed by mid-afternoon. The images were clear and detailed. Japanese aircraft exploding, breaking apart, falling in flames. 7 distinct kills, all within 6 minutes, all confirming exactly what Shomo had described. Lipscomb's debriefing corroborated the same story from a different vantage point. By 4 in the afternoon, the confirmation was official. Captain William Shomo had 7 aerial victories in a single mission, only the 2nd American pilot ever to achieve 7 or more confirmed kills in one engagement. The only American to have done better was Navy Commander David McCampbell, who had shot down 9 Japanese aircraft on October 24, 1944, during the opening phase of the Battle of Leyte Gulf. But McCampbell had been a proven ace with dozens of previous engagements and 34 career kills. Shomo had 1 prior victory, a Val bomber caught in its landing approach, before he walked into 13 Japanese aircraft and came out the other side with 7 of them destroyed. Word spread through the 5th Air Force by evening. Pilots from other squadrons arrived to hear the story directly. Each time Shomo told it, the response was the same: disbelief, followed by study of the gun camera footage, followed by grudging, amazed acceptance that this had actually happened. The film did not lie. The legacy of the Flying Undertaker. On April 1, 1945, William Shomo was promoted to major. 2 days later, on April 3rd, Major General Ennis Whitehead presented him with the Medal of Honor in a ceremony on Luzon, America's highest military decoration, reserved for actions above and beyond the call of duty in the face of the enemy. The citation described his actions as demonstrating extraordinary gallantry and intrepidity in attacking such a far superior force and destroying 7 enemy aircraft in one action, calling it unparalleled in the Southwest Pacific area. It was not hyperbole. Nothing like it had happened in that theater before. Lieutenant Lipscomb received the Distinguished Service Cross for his own actions that morning: 3 confirmed kills, aggressive engagement against overwhelming odds, disciplined support of his squadron commander during the attack. Lipscomb's 3 victories brought his total combat score to 3. He survived the war and returned home. Shomo himself flew additional reconnaissance missions after January 11th. He encountered enemy aircraft only once more during the war, spotted 4 Japanese fighters at distance in conditions that didn't favor engagement, and chose not to attack. His final combat statistics paint a picture unlike any other pilot's in the Pacific. 203 missions before January 11, 1945. 14 total enemy aircraft sighted during the entire war. 8 destroyed. A kill ratio of 57%, meaning that of every enemy aircraft Shomo ever saw from his cockpit, more than half were destroyed. No other pilot in the theater came close to that percentage. The statistic only makes sense when you understand that most of his combat missions never put him anywhere near Japanese fighters, and when the opportunity finally arrived, he made it count with extraordinary efficiency. He named one later aircraft the Flying Undertaker. The name told the whole story. The Pittsburgh mortician who had spent 3 years preparing himself for a fight that seemed like it might never come, and then in 6 minutes on a clear January morning over northern Luzon, became one of the most effective aerial combatants of the entire Pacific War. His aircraft named Snooks 5, the F-6D that carried him through those 6 minutes, was later lost. Taken by another pilot on a different mission, destroyed in circumstances unrelated to Shomo himself. The pilot survived. The aircraft did not. After the war, the Army Air Forces became the United States Air Force in 1947, and Shomo remained. He continued flying, took on command positions, directed combat operations, led interceptor squadrons through the early Cold War years. He was promoted to lieutenant colonel on February 20, 1951, and commanded multiple fighter interceptor squadrons through the 1950s. He retired in 1968 after 27 years of total military service. In interviews given in his later years, Shomo consistently deflected the praise that the story seemed to demand. He talked about luck, timing, the right circumstances converging at the right moment. He credited his wingman and his aircraft and his training. He did not describe himself as exceptional. He described himself as a pilot who got the opportunity and took it. Other pilots who had studied the gun camera footage saw something different. What the film showed was not luck. It was precise deflection shooting at minimum range, efficient ammunition use, not burning through rounds in panic, but placing bursts where they needed to go, sustained situational awareness during an engagement that involved 13 aircraft, multiple attack angles, a tail chase, and a stall maneuver against an aggressive interceptor, all within 6 minutes of continuous combat. Those were not the reflexes of fortune. They were the product of 3 years of theoretical study applied all at once under maximum pressure, by a man who had been ready long before the moment arrived. The lesson that the story of William Shomo leaves behind is not really about aerial combat. It is about the relationship between preparation and opportunity. Shomo spent 3 years in aircraft too limited to reach the enemy, flying missions that earned no glory, building knowledge and skill that had no immediate outlet. By any external measure, he was stagnating, a reconnaissance pilot in an inconvenient corner of the war while other men became famous. But internally, he was preparing. And when the F-6D Mustang arrived and put him in the right aircraft, and when January 11th put 13 Japanese aircraft above him on a clear morning at the perfect altitude, all of that preparation discharged in 6 minutes of almost flawless execution. 7 aircraft destroyed, 0 casualties on the American side, a Medal of Honor, a nickname, the Flying Undertaker, that perfectly captured both who he had been and what he had become. William Shomo died on June 25, 1990, at the age of 72. He is buried in St. Clair Cemetery in Greensburg, Pennsylvania, not far from the Pittsburgh streets where he had once quietly prepared bodies for burial and dreamed, perhaps, of a different kind of sky.
If this story moved you, hit that like button. It helps us share more forgotten chapters from the Second World War with people who deserve to hear them. Subscribe and turn on notifications if you want more stories like this one. Every week we go looking for the men and missions that history almost forgot. Drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. Our community spans the world, and every one of you is part of keeping these stories alive. Thank you for watching.